You have $47,000 in savings, no consumer debt, and a fully funded emergency fund, and you still feel broke. That feeling has a name now. Researchers and clinicians are beginning to call it money dysmorphia, a persistent, distorted perception of your own financial reality, where what you have never quite matches how financially secure you feel. It doesn't only affect people who are actually struggling. It affects people who are, by any objective measure, doing well. And in an era built on the performance of wealth, it is spreading quietly through people who should feel fine, but don't. Before we go any further, let's be precise about what this is and what it isn't. Money dysmorphia is not a clinical diagnosis. It's a behavioral pattern, a chronic misalignment between your actual financial position and your felt sense of that position. And the felt sense almost always skews negative, no matter how much ground you've actually covered. Consider Maya. She's 31, earns $78,000 a year in Chicago, contributes 8% to her 401k, has $14,200 in a high-yield savings account, and carries no credit card balance. On paper, she is ahead of the majority of her age cohort by nearly every standard metric. But Maya's phone is full of content from creators who are apparently doing something else entirely. Renovating investment properties at 28, retiring at 34, living in apartments that look like they cost $6,000 a month to furnish. She opens her banking app, sees the $14,200, and feels a cold, specific shame. Not poverty, not crisis. Just the quiet conviction that she is somehow behind, that $14,200 is real. The shame is also real. But the benchmark producing the shame, the one she's measuring herself against, is not. Then there's Daniel. He's 38, living in Austin, making $95,000. He paid off $22,000 in student loans 2 years ago, a genuine, hard-won achievement. But since then, every dollar he saves feels small against the version of wealth he absorbs daily. The weekend trips posted on a Tuesday, the casual mentions of stock portfolios with comma-heavy balances, the $480 sneakers framed as self-care. Daniel isn't spending recklessly. He's spending defensively, $340 a month on things he doesn't particularly want, because owning them temporarily closes the gap between where he is and where he thinks he should be. Over a year, that's $4,080 that never reached his Roth IRA. Over a decade, at a conservative rate of growth, the opportunity cost is somewhere in the range of $60,000. He doesn't feel like he's losing money. He feels like he's just living. Priya is 27, just landed her first role earning over $60,000 and is doing what most financial educators would call exactly the right things: budgeting carefully, automating $200 a month into a taxable brokerage account, researching every purchase. But she cannot make a financial decision without first checking what it looks like relative to what she sees other people doing. She spent 3 weeks researching a $1,200 laptop she needed for work. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because she was trying to determine whether buying it was the kind of thing a person at her wealth level was supposed to do. She is not anxious about money in the traditional sense. She is anxious about her position in a hierarchy she can't actually see, only infer from a feed that shows her the highlight reel of other people's financial lives, stripped of context, debt, family money, and luck. So why does this happen? Why do 3 people who are, again, objectively, managing their money responsibly feel a persistent, low-grade financial dread? The answer begins with a theory proposed by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1954. His social comparison theory holds that humans have a fundamental drive to evaluate their own opinions and abilities, and in the absence of objective measurement, we evaluate them by comparing ourselves to others. This was, for most of human history, a somewhat contained impulse. You compared yourself to your neighbors, your colleagues, the people you could actually see. The reference group was small enough to be legible. Social media didn't invent social comparison, it industrialized it. What Instagram, TikTok, and the broader performative wealth economy did was catastrophically expand the reference group while simultaneously curating it toward the top. You are no longer comparing yourself to the 30 people in your physical orbit. You are comparing yourself to an algorithmically selected feed of people who, by definition, are posting the moments that make them look the most financially impressive. The average person scrolling their feed on a Tuesday morning is running an unconscious comparison against hundreds of implied financial lives, none of which include the $340,000 mortgage, the parents who paid for graduate school, the credit card balance that funds the aesthetic, or the anxiety sitting just behind the camera. A 2023 report from Credit Karma found that 29% of Americans, including 43% of millennials, identify with the concept of money dysmorphia. And among that group, a striking proportion reported feeling financially behind despite having savings, no debt, or both. The cognitive distortion at work here has a specific name in behavioral economics: relative deprivation. It's the gap between what you have and what you believe you should have, based on your reference group. And when the reference group is infinite and algorithmically optimized to make you feel insufficient, the gap never closes. Not because you're not making progress, but because the goalpost is being moved by a machine that benefits from your dissatisfaction. So how do you correct a distorted perception? Not by ignoring the distortion, that rarely works, but by replacing the false reference point with a real one. The first shift is this: audit your comparison inputs, not your spending. Before you look at your budget next month, spend 1 week tracking how many times you open a financial or lifestyle content feed and leave feeling worse about your money. Not worse informed, worse. There's a difference. If the answer is more than 10 times in a week, you are not receiving information. You are receiving a curated argument that you are behind. Reduce that input deliberately, not forever. Just enough to notice what your baseline financial anxiety actually is, without the amplification. Many people who do this report that their felt sense of financial stress drops, without their bank balance changing by a single dollar. The second shift is to replace social benchmarks with personal ones. This sounds simple and is actually quite hard. Concretely, it means this: once a quarter, calculate your net worth, not your income. Not what you spent, your net worth. Assets minus liabilities. Write it down. Then compare it only to your own previous number. If that number moved in the right direction, even by $800, that is your benchmark. That is what progress looks like for you, not for a person on a screen whose full financial picture you cannot see and will never be shown. The third shift is to name the defensive spend before it happens. When you are about to make a purchase that is driven, even partly, by closing a perceived gap between yourself and someone else's projected financial image, pause and name it. Say it, even silently. This is a comparison purchase. It doesn't mean you can't buy it, but it breaks the automatic loop. Over time, that pause alone, just the naming, has been shown in behavioral research to reduce impulse expenditure. For Daniel, interrupting $340 a month in comparison-driven spending and redirecting it to his Roth IRA means $4,080 a year working toward retirement instead of toward a feeling that was never going to last anyway. Nothing about your financial life changed while you were scrolling. The number you checked this morning is the same number. What changed was the frame around it, the invisible standard you were measuring against, built from curated moments that were never the full picture. That's the thing about money dysmorphia. It doesn't distort the number, it distorts the meaning you assign to it. And meaning is something you can reclaim. The same account that felt like failure, measured against reality instead of performance, is just called progress. What you have is not the problem. How you're seeing it is. Subscribe if that distinction matters to you.